My speech today will focus on strengthening workers' rights in Singapore, particularly with regard to trade unions, platform work associations, and the representation framework for ride-hailing and delivery service workers introduced in the Platform Workers Bill. Sir, unions in Singapore play an important role in advocating for the interests of workers. I would like to acknowledge the many unionists who work hard advocating for fair treatment, better working conditions, and improved wages for their members. Over 99% of trade union members in Singapore are represented through the National Trades Union Congress, or NTUC, and its affiliates, and 58 out of 61, or 95% of employee trade unions in Singapore are affiliated with the NTUC, underscoring the near total monopoly that the NTUC has over the labor movement in Singapore. The NTUC has declared that they have a symbiotic relationship with the PAP. This relationship is frequently highlighted during union meetings and rallies. The NTUC May Day rally in 2024, for example, included a chant led by NTUC President, which concluded with, and I quote, "Majulah NTUC, Majulah PAP, Majulah Singapura." The NTUC Secretary General and many PAP leaders, including the Prime Minister and Senior Minister, joined in this chant on the big stage, pumping their fists in the air. Many PAP MPs and PAP branch chairpersons serve as advisors to NTUC-affiliated unions. The NTUC announced in 2017 that where possible, all PAP MPs, which include cabinet ministers, would be appointed as advisors in the unions, professional associations, and guilds under NTUC. As at 2017, there were 71 PAP MPs who were advisors to unions. It should be noted that many union advisors are there not only in an advisory capacity, but are involved in the governance of the union. Many unions affiliated to the NTUC have a council of advisors, which, for several industry unions, also has the power to suspend the executive committee. PAP leaders frequently argue that this symbiotic relationship has helped Singapore navigate crises and build a nation. However, this close alignment also presents significant challenges to the independence of unions. The primary mission of unions is to advocate for workers' rights, ensure fair treatment, and negotiate for better working conditions. Yet, when union leaders are also PAP members, a potential conflict of interest arises. Can they fully advocate for workers' interests when those interests may conflict with the government policies or the PAP's political agenda? They may feel pressured to support the policy even if they sincerely believe that it compromises the needs of the workers they represent. This could lead to a muted union advocacy where political alignment takes precedence over workers' rights. Over time, the deep entrenchment of PAP influence within unions could lead to the perception that unions are not independent bodies representing workers, but extensions of the PAP's political machinery. If workers believe their interests are being subordinated to the political interests of the PAP or the political objectives of the PAP, unions may lose their ability to effectively mobilize and advocate for workers. Furthermore, an overly close relationship between the PAP and unions risks creating groupthink, where union leaders are less inclined to challenge prevailing policies or explore alternative solutions. This may limit unions' ability to openly express workers' grievances or discuss innovative policies that could benefit workers, employers, and the economy. Such a situation would lead to a loss of dynamism in labor policy making, reducing the possibility of new and better approaches to emerge from emerging. The risk of this alignment may be particularly pronounced in the event of a significant political shift in Singapore. If the PAP were to lose power, unions aligned with the PAP might struggle to work with the new government. Additionally, these politically aligned unions may lose the support of workers who voted for the new administration, potentially weakening their effectiveness. It is crucial that key institutions in Singapore, including the trade union movement, are not beholden to one political party. Conversely, it will be equally undesirable for 95% of unions to become instruments of opposition against a newly elected government, as this could undermine its ability to govern effectively and act in the best interests of workers and citizens alike. The International Labour Organization, which supports tripartite cooperation between governments, employers, and workers, insists that unions must maintain independence to effectively represent their members' interests. ILO's Convention number 87 on freedom of association and protection of the right to organize, which the Singapore government has not ratified, stresses that workers and employers' organizations must be independent from public authorities and free from government control or interference. While collaboration with the government can be beneficial, unions must have the freedom to challenge policies that do not serve workers' best interests without fear of political repercussions. Turning to the Platform Workers Bill, Mr. Speaker, I support this legislation, which seeks to enhance the representation of private hire drivers and delivery riders. These workers form a growing segment of our economy, and their voices must be heard. However, the bill imports many of the regulatory restrictions currently faced by unions. The platform work associations, much like NTUC-affiliated unions, already operate under significant NTUC control. The National Taxi Association, the National Private Hire Vehicles Association, and the National Delivery Champions Association all have current or former PAP MPs as advisors. Their constitutions grant NTUC the power to appoint members of the Council of Advisors who play a key role in overseeing the actions of the executive committees. The Council of Advisors has the authority to suspend the executive committees elected by members. This mirrors the power the NTUC exerts over many of the affiliated unions, limiting their independence. Furthermore, the Registrar of PWAs...
If I may, Mr. Speaker, a point of order. I listened very carefully to Mr. Giam's speech for the first 10 minutes. I humbly and respectfully submit to the Chair that the first 10 minutes had nothing to do with the Platform Workers Bill that is being debated today. It was predominantly an attack against the NTUC. And that is why the Honourable Member, halfway through his speech, says, I now turn my focus to the bill, when actually the focus should have been from the onset about the bill. So I want to raise this as a point of order. This is not part of the bill, and Mr. Giam's speech about attacking the NTUC, in my humble view, in my capacity as a member of this House, is completely off tangent, with respect.
Mr. Giam, I was actually about to ask you the relevance to it, and then you made reference to the current bill, and I'm waiting to hear you talk about the current bill. So I think the member, Mr. Christopher D'Souza, has raised a relevant point. So I would expect that the rest of your speech should cover what this bill is about. If it is on another matter, you can certainly raise it, but not on occasion of this debate.
Sir, it's in relation to the provisions in the bill, which you'll understand why when I explain further.
If I may, will the member concede that the first half of his speech had little to do with the bill and was a rather opportunistic maneuver to attack the NTUC? I sat down, I listened very carefully, I studied the bill, and this was all about an attack on the NTUC, which I think is unfair, it is opportunistic, and it goes beyond the agenda of what we are debating today, which is a specific legislation to advance the protection and the future of platform workers. So will Mr. Giam agree with me that the first half of his speech is actually fairly irrelevant? Through you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Giam, would you like to respond to Mr. D'Souza?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker. As I said earlier, sir, the first part of my speech is relevant to what I'm going to be talking about in the bill. And I think it's important to set the background for why I'm going to argue some of the points that I will be talking about in a while.
Mr. D'Souza?
If I may. So thus far, am I correct to say, or my understanding is correct, that thus far there hasn't been a specific reference to any provision of the bill in Mr. Giam's speech, and it was predominantly an attack on the NTUC and the symbiotic relationship between the PAP and the NTUC. Surely Mr. Giam can agree with me on that, based on what he has said as recorded in Hansard. And I raise this as a point of order because we cannot, Mr. Speaker, be using Parliament and legislation to craft political speeches that go well beyond the ambit and the scope of the legislation that we are debating. So I raise this as a matter of principle, not as a matter of politics.
It's a valid point by Mr. D'Souza, Mr. Giam, because in fact, you're already at the halfway point of your 20-minute speech. Leader?
Mr. Speaker, I too have a clarification of Mr. Giam, which is this. Is it Mr. Giam's position that unions have to be independent of and not associated with political parties?
In fact, yes. That's sorry, Mr. Speaker, would you?
Yeah, Mr. Giam, go ahead.
To answer the leader, yes, exactly that's what I'm going to be coming to. So I'll really appeal to both the leader and Mr. D'Souza to listen to the rest of my speech, because the first part of my speech is a preamble to what I'm going to be talking about and is relevant to what I'm talking about in a while.
Leader?
Well, if I may just make this clarification, since Mr. Giam is going to proceed on the rest of his speech on the basis that unions and political parties have to be independent and separate. In fact, anyone who knows anything about democracies will know that in many of the democracies in the world, unions and political parties actually have a close relationship. The UK Labour Party, which is currently now in power, is very closely associated with their trades union congress. And in fact, their trades union congress actually has contributed to the political party, as I understand it. In the United States, the unions are also closely associated with some political parties, and that is also the case in Canada. So if one were to do the simple exercise of just Googling unions and politics or unions and political parties, you will actually see that there is a very clear explanation as to why unions and politics are very closely involved. So if Mr. Giam is going to proceed with his speech on the basis that they must be independent and neutral, he must also understand that that is not the case in democracies around the world.
So,
Mr. Giam?
So I think the leader raises this point about unions and the affiliation with political parties. I have studied about what the situation is in the UK to some degree. Indeed, many unions in the UK support the Labour Party, but it is not the same as them being symbiotic with the Labour Party. They reserve the right to state their own positions, and very often, and there are times when they have their own different positions from the party, and including in their public statements. So it is not the same degree of symbiotic relationship as what NTUC has with the PAP. And I wanted to come to this point later, but I think since the leader has brought this up, I would like to state for the record that WP supports the tripartite dialogue between employers, unions, and the government of the day, but not with any particular political party, not an explicit alignment with any political party. I believe that unions must be independent and non-partisan, and they must represent their workers without fear or favor in front of their employers, the government, and the ruling party. And I believe that unions which are independent from political parties will be in a better position to negotiate for their workers regardless of the political situation. So if I may continue my speech, please.
Relating to this bill.
Of course. Furthermore, the Registrar of PWAs has the authority to refuse registration of a new PWA if there is already an existing one for that platform service, or even to cancel the registration of an existing PWA under similar conditions. Given that NTUC-affiliated PWAs are likely to be registered first, this could limit the formation of alternative PWAs, thereby restricting workers' choices. Platform workers should instead have the freedom to choose to join or form the association that best represents their interests. The bill proposes that recognition of a PWA would require a majority vote from platform workers eligible to participate in the recognition process. However, I'm concerned that in some cases, the percentage of workers voting could be low, and a PWA might gain recognition even with limited support from the overall workforce. This could result in representation that does not fully reflect the will of the majority of platform workers in the sector. Clause 40 of the bill allows the PWA's executive committee to bind all members to a collective agreement without the need for ratification by the members. This could result in workers being bound by agreements negotiated by representatives chosen by only a small fraction of their peers. We must ask whether this truly serves the interests of the workers or simply expedites the process at the cost of their collective voice. The Workers' Party has long opposed moves to make unions less independent. In 2004, Mr. Gerald Giam opposed amendments to the Trade Unions Act that allowed union leaders to conclude collective agreements with employers without seeking union members' ratification. That amendment was eventually passed by Parliament, and the same provision is now mirrored in the Platform Workers' Bill, raising similar concerns about the erosion of workers' rights to have a direct say in agreements that affect them. The bill also requires platform companies to contribute employer CPF payments to their workers. This is a positive step towards improving platform workers' long-term financial security. I support the platform workers' CPF transition scheme, which will cushion the effects of CPF deductions from workers' earnings. However, there is a risk that platform companies might reduce their overall payments to compensate for the increased CPF contributions. This could result in workers being worse off salary-wise. This is a concern highlighted by the leader of the opposition earlier as well. It is important that the government monitors this closely and ensures that safeguards are in place to prevent such unintended consequences so that the platform workers truly benefit from the CPF contributions without suffering a reduction in take-home pay. Before I conclude, Mr. Speaker, I would like to once again acknowledge the efforts of unionists who have dedicated themselves to advancing the rights and welfare of workers in Singapore. My proposals to ensure the independence of workers and PWAs are not aimed at diminishing their work, but rather to enhance their ability to advocate freely for the workers they represent. By ensuring that unions and PWAs are not beholden to any political party or the government, unionists will have the autonomy to fully pursue the interests of their members, challenge government policies that do not align with workers' needs, and introduce innovative solutions to improve wages and working conditions. Ultimately, an independent union movement will not only strengthen the labour movement, but also create a dynamic and resilient workforce for Singapore's future. Thank you, sir.
Mr. Giam, I just request that you refer to Standing Order, Section 50, and this is with reference to the relevance of the topics that you talk about. And this also applies to every member. Leader of the opposition.
Mr. Speaker, just to put on record, I think the remarks you made at the end with respect are critical because I distinctly recall in this House, not too long ago, I believe it was a budget speech, and the Honourable Member, Mr. Chris D'Souza, did not speak about the budget, but went on to advise the government or the PAP to make a decision on the 4G leadership. So I think the salutary message you provided at the end is important, because it cannot be just accusations made at the opposition, but I think some PAP members ought to reflect on themselves.
Mr. D'Souza.
I'm grateful to the Leader of the Opposition for mentioning my name. We are debating a specific bill today with several provisions and several clauses. And I think it is completely our aim to get this bill passed in order to protect platform workers. So we have a bill, we have an agenda today. When it comes to a budget debate, right, the members have free rein to discuss what they want. In addition to the budget, the objectives, the values, the future they want to see for Singapore. And at that time, I was concerned because we had a position that there would be a 4G leadership transition. DPM Heng, in his selflessness, decided to step aside, and I was concerned for the country that we needed leadership. So I stood here and gave one of the most difficult speeches of my political career, which is that I had hoped and hope that the 4G leadership would come together and choose a man or a woman to take us forward. How is that not in concert with the budget? Budget is finance. It is also about different education, ministries, finance, defense, and all of that. But without key leadership, budgets are nothing. So what I said, I humbly say, when I made that speech, I think in 2021 or 2022, I can't remember, about needing to choose a solid, formidable 4G leader, was completely consistent with what we were debating for in terms of passing the budget. An attack on the NTUC for, I think, 70% of the speech of Mr. Giam on a bill that is meant to advance the welfare, the prospects, the future, the protection, the medical care, the CPF of platform workers is no comparison. That is political opportunism. And I state this as a matter of principle, not as a matter of politics. I put principle first before politics, Mr. Singh.
Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I think the record will speak for itself, and I think Mr. Giam has explained why his subject matter, which Mr. Chris D'Souza has taken objection to, is connected to the bill. Thank you.
Mr. D'Souza.
Most certainly, Mr. Speaker, sir, the record will speak for itself, and I enjoin Mr. Singh, respectable leader of the opposition, and Mr. Giam to pick up my speech of 2021 or 2022, I can't remember, it was during COVID, where I had made the position very clear that we need to choose the 4G leader. So the record will speak for itself. And please, members, you can make your own decision whether what I said is in concert with the budget that we were meant to pass, and what Mr. Giam has said today, the honourable member, is in concert with an attack on the NTUC or support on the bill. The record will speak for itself.
Mr. Heng Chee Hao.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Because Mr. Gerald Giam, in his speech, spoke about the role of union leaders, and then he spoke about the NTUC and that symbiotic relationship with the PAP. So I must respond to that. Mr. Giam thanked our union leaders for taking good care of our workers. We thank him for that. At least he acknowledges that. But I think in saying that, then you must also give due respect to our union leaders. They are not stooges. Their hearts are in the right place. They do all this for their fellow workers. That's what they are doing this for. And you acknowledge that. And all our unions are doing that. And every union that is affiliated to the NTUC chooses to do that. And the NTUC has a symbiotic relationship with the PAP so that we can convey the views and the needs of the workers to our political partner, so that when they become the ruling party, when they win the trust of Singaporeans and have the mandate to be the ruling party, that the interests of workers in this country will always be taken care of, be given great priority. And you look at the track record of the PAP. For all these years that it has been in government, what has it delivered for this country? What has it delivered for the workers? Has it sold out the workers? Has it embarrassed our union leaders? So you are talking about some theoretical construct. Look at the results. Look at the context in which we are debating today. This very bill that your party is supporting, where does this come from? This comes from a symbiotic relationship where both sides are trying to undermine and throw the workers under the bus? No. You supported it because it is good for the workers. Is this the only thing that's good for the workers? No. We have decades of track record. Why do you think the workers would support their unions who affiliate themselves to the NTUC? It is because we work for the workers. So when we say every worker matters, NTUC means it. And that goes to also when we go into a symbiotic relationship, we do so for the sake of the workers. So I just wanted Mr. Giam to know, you are entitled to your views, certainly, but what I wanted to say is, can we at least deal with the facts? And we are not forming this yesterday. Leader has earlier also stated that a close relationship, you can call it what you like, partnership, alliance, between political parties and trade unions is not uncommon. And they don't do this out of stupidity. They do this because it serves the interests of the constituents that they represent concurrently. That is what they do. And the recommendations that Mr. Giam makes, be very careful, Mr. Speaker, because on the one hand, he says that it is good to work for the workers and so on. On the other hand, you look at some of the recommendations he makes, is it likely, more likely or less likely for those tripartite partners in the context in which Mr. Giam has promoted, likely or less likely to come to some sensible agreement that can then be implemented for the good of the workers? And if it is not, then it just goes round and round, and we can tear our hair out, beat our chest, and we say we love the workers. Their lot is not going to get better. So I say be very, very careful. I once saw a poster, I think it's available on the YouTube. It shows some water, it shows a snake, head reared above the water with a fish in the mouth. And the slogan says, "Carrying snake saves fish from drowning." So we must be very, very careful. What exactly are we recommending? If we care for that fish in there, let's do something practical. So I just wanted to, this as my heartfelt response, be fair to our union leaders, be fair to our unions, be fair to the NTUC. NTUC is not expecting the Workers' Party to support us, but at least be fair. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Giam.
So I thank SMS Heng for his heartfelt exposition. And I did acknowledge the hard work of unionists at both the start and the end of my speech. And I'm not questioning the commitment and the work of unionists, but I'm addressing the systemic constraints that they face. I believe that many unionists are trying their level best to be able to advocate for workers that they represent, but they face many restrictions in doing so because of the controls that the government, through the NTUC and other legislations, place on the unions. So I believe that my proposals for union independence are meant to empower unionists and platform work associations leaders to act freely in the best interests of their workers. And I'd just like to address a point that Mr. Chris D'Souza kept bringing up, that the first part of my speech was irrelevant. I hope that after listening to the rest of my speech, he would acknowledge that the first part of my speech was an important preamble to what I was going to explain in the later part of my speech. And I believe it was a policy point that I was putting forward and on behalf of the Workers' Party. And I just wonder, why is it that every time the Workers' Party brings up a valid policy point, or very often when Workers' Party brings up a valid policy point, we are accused of politicking and making political speeches. Whereas when the PAP talks about something different, it becomes a relevant policy point. I think that there's a need to be fair as well to us.
Mr. D'Souza.
I think I've been in this House long enough for people to know that I put principles above politics. First point. Second point, I listened very carefully to what Mr. Giam was saying for, I think, 60 or 70% of his speech. And it was essentially an attack on the NTUC, and by extension, an attack on the NTUC's symbiotic relationship with the PAP. And I don't think one can disagree with that, because at about the 60th or 70% mark of the speech, the Honourable Member says, now I turn my focus to the bill. What was the Honourable Member's focus prior to that? So no, I'm not standing here as a point of order to make a political point. I'm not that type of person. I'm governed by principles, and my point is that the Honourable Member went beyond the line on this bill. Thank you.
Associate Professor James Lim.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, I'm a first-term Member of Parliament, so perhaps for my edification, yourself or perhaps the Leader of the House would be willing to share whether the budget is a time for MPs to be able to raise any matters of concern for the broad nation.
Leader.
I would just say this, which is that is an ample demonstration of how, when you're on a particular topic, then you make a sidestep and say this is about something else. And then we have another sidestep and this is about something else. So I think the short point to Associate Professor James Lim is that this is about the Platform Workers Bill. Let's keep this to the Platform Workers Bill.
To Associate Professor James Lim, regarding budget statements, if I refer all to Standing Order 89, some subsections there which tells you what you can talk about, and then for Committee of Supply debate, this will be covered under Standing Order Section 93. Mr. Alex Giam.
Mr. Speaker, I spent quite a large part of my career in the trade unions, and I think there's no more passionate group of people in fighting for the rights of workers than union leaders. I'd just like to share a point of information. The Honourable Member, Mr. Gerald Giam, said that he studied the trade unions' relationship in the UK. I'm not sure if he realizes that the trade unions in the UK actually pay an annual fee to the Labour Party. In return, they elect 13 out of 39 members of the National Executive Committee and 50% of delegates to the Labour Party conference. So why is it that they can have a formal relationship and we can't in Singapore? The New Democratic Party in Canada was founded in 1967 by who? By the Canadian Labour Congress. So they have a long working relationship. It's encapsulated in the NDP's constitution as well. So political relationship and affiliations between trade unions and political parties are a natural partnership, because for trade unions to want to achieve something, they do so through political means. Some, of course, choose to be independent. That's great. But across the democratic world, there are many, many examples of good, strong working relationships between political parties and trade unions. And there are also many trade unions that choose, through their history, to form political parties to advocate for the rights of their workers. So I'm not sure what part of the relationship or history that he has seen in the UK that proves this otherwise.
SMS Co.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to reiterate again that nothing in this proposed bill, in the legislation proposed in this bill, has any clauses that is related to how a union ought or not ought to be affiliated to any political party. And since Mr. Giam did go to great extent to talk about affiliation between unions and party, let me just quickly read from the archives of the National Library that says, after the PAP split its left wing to set up the Barisan Socialists, the Singapore Trades Union Congress also split into two rival factions, the NTUC and the Singapore Association of Trade Unions, or SATU. As SATU was aligned with the Barisan Socialists, and the Barisan Socialists in 1988 folded into the Workers' Party. So I think maybe the Workers' Party should think about changing its name, because if you feel so averse about being associated with workers, you might want to think about something else.
Mr. Giam.
So I thank the SMS for that information. Can I assume that, taking the statements of the leader of the House, SMS Co, and Mr. Alex Giam together, that if the PAP were to ever lose power, the NTUC would therefore become an instrument of opposition against the new government?
Leader.
The short answer, I can't speak on behalf of the NTUC, but how I would see it is this. It would be entirely up to the Workers and the Trades Unions Congress to decide whether to have any political party that they support, and if so, which one. What I can say is that the PAP would do its very utmost not to have to give them a reason to think that we would never support them, or that as a government, we would not do our very best for the workers and the Trade Union Congress. So I would not venture into all these hypothetical questions, and you can see that Mr. Giam is venturing more and more into the political realm. I would just bring the debate back to this. This is about platform workers. This is about our gig workers. This is about people who don't have much protection and who need protection, and we are trying to get this bill passed so that they can have that protection. The Workers' Party obviously wishes to, let us all be quite frank. We all know that next year there has to be a general election. So, by next year it has to be a general election. It may be this year, maybe next year, but we all know that by next year there has to be one. And we also know that whenever a general election appears or is around the corner, the political rhetoric ramps up. That political parties can slug it out amongst themselves, but don't put the platform workers in the middle of this. Don't make them the pawns or the beating bags for this. We have a bill to pass. Let us focus on this bill, because with this bill, we can do better for our workers, our gig workers, and protect them.
Mr. Giam.
So most importantly, so we have supported this bill. So we are not putting the platform workers in any disadvantaged position by opposing this bill. We are supporting this bill. On the point that the leader raises that it would be up to the NTUC or the workers of that day whether or not they want to, which party they want to support. How can that be? Because the NTUC has embedded its party members in different areas of the unions. How would they be able to change that if the PAP is so deeply embedded inside the unions? And in any case, I think the whole thrust of what the leader and SMS Co and Mr. Giam had said earlier on is that the NTUC is aligned to the PAP and is nothing unusual in the world. So we expect that the NTUC would continue to be aligned with the PAP even after the PAP loses power. It is not an issue of just theoretical grandstanding, but this is an issue of institutional continuity. Are we going to have a situation where any new government that comes to power is completely jammed up?
Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I really hope not to have to belabor this point, but it's a simple point. Trade unions elect their own leaders. If they have leaders today who are members of the PAP or vice versa, it doesn't mean that will always be the case. But the point that Mr. Giam is missing is that the trade unions have a mind of their own. They have leadership. They know what to do, and they will act in a way that they think is best for their unions and for their workers. So at the appropriate time, they will have their elections, they will choose their leaders. You don't know whether they may or may not be affiliated with the PAP, whatever it is. But at the end of the day, it is the unions who choose their leaders, and it is the unions who choose whether or not they are affiliated or work with or have a symbiotic relationship with a political party. That's entirely up to the trade unions, and we should let them continue to do and decide for themselves as they think best. But at the end of the day, it comes back to this. We have a bill to pass, and let's pass this bill so that we can confer rights and protections on our platform workers.
Let's come back to the debate on the platform workers bill.